Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. I have my good friend Tyler. He is the CTO at Omni. So Tyler, before we get too deep into Omni, give us a brief background in yourself and then how you found yourself CTO at Omni.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a journey. I actually started my career in quant trading. I was at a startup building machine learning algorithms for volatile marketplaces, so energy markets and financial markets. And I got to work with teams at larger banks, lending and borrowing desks, hedge funds, energy companies. And in particular, the lending and borrowing desks I thought were interesting because around 2019, 2020, I started exploring Compound on chain and diving into the open source code that they had out there. And I realized that a lot of what Compound was building was actually automating what I was seeing in my day job at the banks were doing, their lending and borrowing desks. And got really excited about just the power of being able to prototype a financial tool overnight, the simplicity of Solidity and DeFi. And of course, this is when the DeFi boom was happening in 2019, 2020, and a lot of people were getting interested in it. And started exploring it with all of my free time, as many of us have and have experienced going down the rabbit hole. I started chatting with Austin, who is now my co-founder. At the time, he was just a friend from university, but he had been in crypto, actually working in Interop since like 2016, 2017. He was working on a protocol called Interledger, which the mental model for Interledger didn't really play out, but it did nerd snipe a lot of smart people back in the day. And so I started chatting with Austin. He was also getting interested in DeFi and what was happening. And we started prototyping, researching, writing some white papers, and actually ended up building a DeFi protocol on Ethereum layer 1. This was called Rift Finance. And it created a structured financial product built to solve the liquidity mining problem that many projects were facing. They were printing tokens in order to fund these liquidity pools on decentralized exchanges, Uniswap and SushiSwap, and just bleeding money. So we built this financial product. It was like a junior senior tranching protocol. We launched it on Ethereum layer 1. We had some early success. We hit our TVL cap of $50 million in the first couple of days of launch. And so we were cruising, and then we were considering how to scale Rift from Ethereum layer 1 to the blossoming Rollup ecosystem, which at the time was just Arbitrum and Optimism. But even then, it presented challenges to figuring out how we should approach scaling Rift. So we explored a couple options and ultimately decided that the challenges we were facing actually required a whole new solution to solving them. We could solve them for ourselves and for other developers. I'll pause there for now because I've been rambling a little bit, but happy to dive into some of those challenges later on.
Yeah, actually, I think let's jump right into Omni and talk a little bit about like why you ended up starting those.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll talk about our experience as smart contract developers because that's exactly why we decided to build Omni. When we were trying to scale Rift from L1 to L2s, well, like I said, we could decide between Arbitrum and Optimism. It was like, do you want to go to Optimism where we could get a grant and there's Ethereum energy, or do we want to go to Arbitrum where there's a ton of DeFi activity already? And that's not a great trade-off to make as a developer. So a couple options you have. You can pick one of them and sacrifice the users and capital on the other one. That's pretty suboptimal because you're limiting yourself to the users and capital wherever you deploy.
And this is pre-Superchain, pre-Orbit.
Correct, yeah. But many of those same challenges we're seing today with like subgroups of rollups and clusters, people call them. So the mental model extends. So that was option one, just pick one and limit yourself there. Option two was to deploy your application to both, which helps because you can accept users and capital from both deployments, but it also is pretty frustrating because you're fragmenting your user base across chains. If your application has network effects, then your network's effects are siloed to each deployment. So that's not a great option either. The third option is kind of redesign your application from scratch with a cross-chain messaging protocol and kind of create a cross-chain application. But that also introduces its own challenges where you now have to get new smart contract audits, which takes 3 to 6 months. You need to spend a ton of engineering time developing these new contracts. And so we were like, all right, let's take a step back. None of these options are very good. This is clearly not how smart contract developers should be deploying applications in 5 years in the ideal state. So how do we think they're going to do it? Let's do some research. We studied L2s and interoperability and did about 6 months of just research to figure out how we could solve this problem, solve it for ourselves, and then also solve it for other developers and users because everyone was experiencing this at the time. And this is how we ultimately decided to build Omni. We have the same team, same investors. We went back to our investors, and fortunately, they were very much on board for this new vision. They recognized that we had some early success with Rift, but they were like, we invested in the team, not in the protocol, or not in the product. So this is what you have conviction in. Go do it. And so we did. We've been working on Omni for about 1.5 years now. After that point.
And so tell us a little bit about how Omni actually approaches this solution. Because I'm trying to think, we've done so many episodes, which maybe an episode with Polymer or an episode with obviously the team at Optimism. There are different approaches that you mentioned that are Particle, different approaches that you mentioned on terms of chain abstraction and trying to do, cross-chain communication. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys approach this in a very different manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing you might have heard at this point is that we want to make Ethereum feel like a single chain, but how do we actually do that? So the technical complement to the making Ethereum a single chain is that we want users to be able to make any action on any chain in 1 second or less. So our approach is that latency is the great equalizer. And so when you think about it, UX is not just a Web3 thing. It's a Web2 thing. There's been many studies and research on this for users and developers. And I think the traditional rule of thumb is if you can execute users' requests in 2 seconds or less, you can retain about 60% of users. If you can do it in 1 second or less, then you can retain 90% of users. So we want to get to that benchmark of retaining 90% of users on any app. And so how do we actually do that? And I'll take you a little bit through the history and hierarchy of latencies for interoperability. At the base level, which is the slowest, you have native settlement bridges for L2s. So this is for optimistic rollups will take 7 days. For ZK rollups, 45 minutes, 3 hours, depending on the implementation. And that's going to get better with time. But that's kind of the base layer of interop. If you want to move tokens from Arbitrum to Optimism, you need to withdraw from Arbitrum, which takes 7 days, and then bridge to Optimism, which takes about 10 minutes. So that's layer one. Sorry, maybe I should use a different term than layer one. That's overloaded at this point in crypto. Sure. But that's step one. That's the slowest. Step two is cross-chain messaging. And specifically cross-chain messaging on finalized rollup state. So if you want to send tokens or data or a message from Arbitrum to Optimism without going through the native bridge, you can use a protocol like Omni's cross-chain messaging protocol. There are others out there as well. And the reason you can do this faster than 7 days or an hour for ZK rollups is that you can have some non-Ethereum based consensus mechanism. Watch rollups and say, okay, the rollup has built this block. It has the sequencer has attested to it. The sequencer has posted it to Ethereum layer 1, and it has been finalized according to Ethereum consensus, which takes about 12 minutes or sometimes 15 minutes. And if you have this off-chain consensus mechanism, then you can do it much faster. So that takes about 15 minutes because of the speed of Ethereum's consensus algorithm. And that's level 2. So you have these finalized messages, and Omni enables this. So do some other protocols. The layer 3 or level 3 is messages that can be delivered without Ethereum's finalized consensus. So this is another thing that Omni enables. We have this model called fast or finalized. So you can choose to send a message in a finalized manner, which waits for Ethereum consensus 15 minutes, or you can send it in a fast mode, which comes to consensus off chain. Just instead of waiting for Ethereum consensus, it waits for the rollup sequencer to say this is a valid message. But it doesn't wait for it to post it to L1. So that's level 3, and that takes about 5 to 20 seconds. And that's pretty good. We're getting better. And so these layers 2 and layer 3 are what we're enabling with Omni Core. This is our base protocol that enables cross-chain messaging and our EVM. But it gets better. So what we're actually building on top of Omni Core is what we call SolverNet, and SolverNet actually increases latency or decreases latency even further. So how do we do this? And this is where we introduce an intent-based architecture where users can send a request from a source chain, what we call solvers or market makers, sophisticated third-party actors in the middle. We'll go execute something on behalf of a user and then actually use Omni's core protocol, the messaging protocol, to relay data about that execution back to the source chain and unlock the funds for solvers. So, yeah.
And for people that are unfamiliar with the term intents, we've done several episodes on it, but I'll give you the best explanation I've heard recently about it. It's essentially you state a goal and the solvers then go out and help you get to the end state. So you specify your beginning state and an end state. It's kind of like ordering an Uber, right? You're like, hey, I'm here. I want to get to this point in New York City. And you get to pick the car maybe, but like at the end of the day, there's some kind of solving algorithm and you just care that it gets you from A to B in a safe manner. And that's pretty much what the solver network is. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but that's the analogy that always worked really well for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly. It's like you have point A and point B, and you tell this network what those points are, and it figures out all of the complex stuff that needs to happen in the middle rather than you kind of doing that as a user. So, I think that's a good description. And actually intents kind of the way we think about it is historically building cross-chain dApps, complexity was on users to go bridge funds, take tokens from one chain to another, execute something else. So that takes, 3, 4, 5 transactions and 20, 30 minutes to bridge. That's pretty miserable. But the developer experience was great because developers only had to build an application on a single chain. They didn't have to worry about building an app that is cross chains. Then we kind of evolved as an industry and said, okay, well, what if developers build cross-chain apps? That makes it much easier for users. They don't have to take care of the complexity of bridging or moving funds around. But it does increase complexity for developers. And turns out developers don't love doing that because smart contracts are super risky and adding in cross-chain messaging protocols are super risky. And so where we're evolving now is actually say, all right, users can keep their simplicity. They don't have to bridge. They don't have to manage funds across chains. Developers can keep their simplicity. They can deploy applications on a single chain. What's going to happen in the middle is these solvers execute all of the complex stuff in the middle on behalf of users. And so super easy for developers because they build applications on a single chain. Super easy for users. They don't need to bridge, worry about changing RPC endpoints or anything. It's that solver network in the middle that is doing the complex stuff.
So maybe, and I think this will be very illustrative if people still aren't full, maybe they're like, hey, I understand the Uber example, but how does this apply to the blockchain? Let's talk actually about like an intent, possibly even like a cross-chain intent, or how this kind of intents would manifest is like, hey, I have, some money lent in Aave. I actually would love to stake that in Lido. Or talk to us a little bit about maybe like a blockchain specific example, a DeFi specific example that people would understand and like kind of the old state, like where they're like, oh, I need to bridge, or like, oh, I need to unstake, swap.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say a user has USDC on Arbitrum and they want to deposit into Aave on Optimism, even though, maybe because Aave's interest rates are the highest on Optimism. So I think a good way to demonstrate this is looking at those levels and actually adding the fourth and fifth levels, which is the last two parts. So level one is, okay, I need to use the native bridge of Arbitrum, bridge my funds from Arbitrum, my USDC from Arbitrum down to Ethereum, and then up to Optimism. That will take 7 days. That's brutal. Nobody's actually going to do that. Okay, level two is use a cross-chain messaging protocol and bridge your tokens from Arbitrum to Optimism. And that, depending on the protocol, will take around 12 minutes for finality. So a user would need to take their USDC, go to the bridge website, connect their wallet, make sure they're on the right chain, bridge the funds, wait for the funds to be bridged, then navigate to the Aave website, make sure their wallet is on Optimism, and then deposit the funds into Optimism. As you can tell, that's also pretty complex and takes
I know
20, 30, 40
UX
minutes.
just always, every time you really spell it out, it just feels so hard. Everything.
Yeah, exactly. So level three then is, all right, instead of using the finalized messages, we're using the fast ones. And that means, well, the bridging action, instead of taking 15 minutes, takes 20 seconds. But you still have to navigate to all of these different websites. And that's still a pain, still takes 15, 20 minutes, most likely, unless you're a super user. But we're not building just for super users. We're building for everybody. So, okay, level four is what we call this. Yeah, this is this intent-based architecture. So you have USDC on Arbitrum. You can call a function on Arbitrum. So actually, let's say you navigate to Aave's website. Aave has a little Omni plugin or some other intent-based architecture that they might be using, and allows you as a user to click deposit into Optimism Aave. So what happens under the hood here is you're signing and executing a transaction in your wallet that sends this intent to Arbitrum, where you have your current funds. It puts your USDC in a box to be used later. So that's one transaction for you, the user. Now, once that's on chain, the solver network will say, okay, Jax, you deposited your USDC into this box. I'm going to go execute this deposit on Optimism on your behalf, and you'll see it pop up as soon as I do that. And this actually takes 2 to 3 seconds. So as from the time that you sign and execute the transaction to the time that a solver deposits into Aave on your behalf on Optimism, 3 seconds, and that's great. You might ask, okay, well, what happens to the USDC that was in that box that I deposited on? But that's not really your concern anymore, because you now have funds in Aave already. What really happens is the solver sends a proof back to Arbitrum that says, hey, I deposited on behalf of Jax. Can I unlock those funds now? And then the box will give the solver their tokens. So that in total takes about 3 seconds from expression of intent to execution of your intent. So when your funds are deposited into Aave on Optimism. Now, the final frontier, and where we're really heading to get this down to 1 second or less, is, what is the bottleneck in that model? And it's actually source chain finality. So when you're depositing into Arbitrum, you need to wait for Arbitrum, when you're depositing your USDC into that box on Arbitrum, you need to wait for Arbitrum finality in order for the solver network to say, hey, I see that Jax deposited into this box. I'm going to go execute something on his behalf. So rather than actually executing a transaction on Arbitrum, you'll be able to send your intent to SolverNet, to the Omni solver network, which is super fast because it's off chain, and the solvers will agree and then go execute your intent on the destination without you ever having to execute a transaction on chain. So you don't have to wait for the block time of the source chain. And that's how we get down to 1 second or less.
And talk to us a little bit about the state of Omni right now. Where are you guys at? Like, are people building? Tell us a little bit about the state of the network.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are launching Mainnet in the next couple of weeks here. Not sure when this episode is going to be released, but it'll be very soon. We're launching Omni Core. So this enables levels 2 and 3, those fast and finalized messages, to be sent. And Omni Core is also used as part of the settlement layer for SolverNet, which is what we're building now. SolverNet will be released iteratively over 2025. We're actually starting with a couple build partners. We announced Symbiotic a couple weeks ago. Symbiotic is a restaking protocol that will be using Omni's SolverNet in. And so what they actually do in practice is they update their front end to accept deposits from anywhere. Symbiotic is a protocol that exists on Ethereum layer 1, and they'll be able to accept deposits from Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, and ultimately other L2s into their protocol on L1 using Omni with just a front end update, no smart contract changes or anything. So for SolverNet, we're working with some early build partners to iterate on the protocol, make sure we're building what people want, what developers want, and then we'll generalize it throughout the course of 2025. But core is being launched. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the solver recruiting problem, because I've talked with a few protocols, and where does one find a solver? With the solvers in the audience, please stand up.
Yeah, that's a good question. So many people compare solvers to market makers in traditional finance, and in fact, many market makers do solving in crypto. So you have your Citadels and Wintermute, but our approach, we're talking with some of these teams already, and there are some solving specific teams. Actually, many of them evolved from MEV land of like 2019, 2018, where it was this whole MEV industrial complex that got built out during that time, and just that the profitability of MEV is now the profitability of solving. They're very similar, actually. So many of the same actors doing MEV also do solving, but we are actually building this in public. So all of our code is open source. We're building an in-house solver that we will be running to start, but we'll be opening it up to anybody, and anybody can actually run the Omni solver, which is one of the reasons we're building it in public. So you can check out our repo. This is a great opportunity for anyone who is very comfortable running nodes or running infrastructure and wants to get their hands dirty with intents and running solvers, because we've got ours out there in public.
Yeah. Now, one question that I'm sure will arise in the users' minds, because we've done so many episodes on essentially like liquidity fragmentation, chain fragmentation, and many of the things that pop up in Ethereum land and other chains for that matter, kind of a victim of success at times. And one thing, because we just did an episode with Termina, and they do Solana network extensions. Why choose to build on Ethereum given like the fragmentation issues? Is it like a strong belief in the Ethereum's vision? I'm quite curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think that we've seen Solana kind of increase in mindshare over the last year or two, almost directly as a result of the fragmentation problem on Ethereum. Solana kind of solves those UX problems by being a monolithic chain. The way I think about it is, first of all, I think Solana has done a great job of actually innovating. And now we're also seeing teams building SVM rollups on Ethereum.
We've got Eclipse coming up this week, which is quite funny.
And so why would you build it in Ethereum land in 2024? Well, one of the things I'm really excited about is Ethereum's policy of simplicity and what they call subtraction. Ethereum is putting opportunities in the hands of developers and its community. Rather than trying to build everything themselves, Ethereum is actually simplifying what Ethereum does and what it offers. And so that creates opportunities for developers to build core infrastructure in that to make Ethereum work. That's one of the things that we're doing. Today, if you're trying to solve big problems, launching as a rollup is a great way to do that. You see teams like Uniswap launching their own L2 unichain, Eclipse, SVM you just mentioned, and that actually allows something that we call application-specific sequencing. So where does revenue come from for decentralized protocols? Really, it comes from what we call sequencing. This is building blocks, intelligently building blocks. Base makes a ton of revenue from running their sequencer. I forget exactly what the stat was, but I saw it a couple weeks ago, and it was insane. And currently, sequencing is in the hands of these general rollups, these top 5 to 10 rollups that we all know about. But by launching your own rollup, you can control your sequencer and actually earn revenue from running the sequencer. And so that's how I believe blockchains will scale in the long term, by putting revenues in the hands of the people building the apps that earn the revenue, rather than introducing middlemen and those middlemen collecting a ton of revenue, which is the state of things today, and the state of things on monolithic chains where everything is sequenced by the validators of that chain.
Now, yeah, if we look, let's say like 3 to 5 years in the future, do you think that kind of rollups will be the future? Like we talk with the Gelato team, they of course think that. I'm curious, do you feel like rollups are the future of like Ethereum scalability, or maybe it's Monad, maybe it's Mega ETH, maybe it's somebody else? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, well, in short, yes. Mega ETH is also a rollup. I'm pretty excited for what they're working on and their innovations around the execution environment that I think a lot of teams can learn from and ultimately borrow from. Vitalik rolled out his rollup-centric roadmap in 2021, and as expected, the first 3 to 5 years of that roadmap are rocky. We're learning and adjusting and iterating as we go. But as we settle into what that vision actually means, I think it's getting better and better as we solve the big problems that it introduces. What I want to be really cautious of as an ecosystem is avoiding the infighting, like almost the cosmosification of Ethereum, where Cosmos is this great technology, but became a siloed ecosystem and with so much infighting that Ethereum is starting to experience as well. And I think it's starting to experience that because of the fragmentation problem, and because there are these barriers between chains. It becomes a battle for users and for developers. Every rollup is fighting for developers and mindshare, trying to take it away from others. And it's a zero-sum game. By removing those barriers and solving the fragmentation problem, it's easy for users and developers to move from one to the next, and it can become a positive-sum game again. So that's what I'm hopeful for.
So if we solve interop, and I'm very bullish on you guys, talk to us a little bit about like what the end state looks like, because there's many complaints where it's like, people are too focused on infrastructure, not enough people are focused on apps, but like really, like, is the infrastructure at a point where we can support like the great use cases? Talk to us a little bit about like the future state of interoperability. Do we think that like in the next like 2-3 years we'll just have a kind of a chainless feel and it's kind of undistracted under the hood?
Yeah, that's the goal. Like I said at the beginning, our goal is to allow users to make any action on any chain in 1 second or less. And if we can solve that, we open up this whole world of user activity that they no longer have to spend all of the mental time and energy on figuring out how to use blockchains. I'm excited for that user-centric future where users do things and blockchains serve users, rather than what we have today. I would call like a blockchain-centric blockchain-centric world where people use blockchains. You're using a specific blockchain when you're going to interact with a DeFi protocol. We need to move beyond that mindset into, users want to do things, and we need to figure out how all of this collection of chains and rollups can serve that use case. So that's what I think the big unlock is over the next 2 to 3 years. We've seen chain abstractions kind of envelop mindshare over the last year as people realize what it means. And yeah, we go in cycles, not just crypto, but tech as well, where infrastructure enables apps, and then apps get better and better, and then the apps require more infrastructure. And I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the infrastructure phase, where people are very excited with where we're going. They see that chain abstraction can solve those problems, and now we can think about the next level of applications.
Absolutely. And one thing I always like to ask all the guests is, we have a lot of builders that listen to the podcast, and what do you think is an underexplored or maybe like an underrated area of, could be Ethereum, could be any part of blockchain? We like having like some builder ideas. So for example, the Bedrock team talked about, dashboards for looking at like restake tokens. I forgot what Monad brought up today, but talk to us a little bit about like where you feel is like a very interesting area. Like if you couldn't build Omni, what would you be looking at?
Yeah, well, I can give a couple answers. So the first thing is data. dashboards similar to what you just mentioned. I think data around the world of intent is so fascinating right now, and there are very few resources to explore it. So, who is running solvers? What is their capital base? Do they hold Bitcoin, ETH, USDC, USDT? Who are they executing? How frequently are they executing user intents on? How is this industry growing? There's like one or two sites, but they're very minimal right now that I know of. And creating dashboards around this can really help us accelerate trends in chain abstraction, because we can't do anything without data. Every decision we make should be based in data somehow. So that's one exciting area. Another is around what we call like settlement with intents. So we're building SolverNet, but there are all sorts of utilities around settlement and being a solver that can be super useful, such as being able to settle across chains, across multiple days, so that these solvers can actually offset costs. Happy to chat with anybody that's interested to learn more about that if you want to hit me on Twitter. But that's kind of two big areas. And then totally random, different area that I'm excited about is DePIN, decentralized physical infrastructure, and these networks that are being built up, and using crypto in a very unique, novel way. Building hardware that kind of uses crypto principles and scaling strategies to incentivize behaviors like Wi-Fi networks, and actually something like a decentralized Google Maps. Very exciting frontier.
Yeah, people, if they're interested in the mapping, they can go back to the Hive Mapper episode. That was actually one of the first episodes we ever had. We were very excited to get Hive Mapper on here.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Hive Map. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, where can people find you online? Where can they find more about Omni? And yeah, shout out any kind of upcoming things that the community should keep an eye out for.
Yeah, definitely. So two good places. One is on Twitter. You can reach out to me or my co-founder, Austin, or actually anybody from the Omni team. Just go to the Omni profile on Twitter, OmniFDN, and you can look at affiliates and you'll see everybody who's on the team. We're very open to DMs, love chatting with people. And then the second place to learn about Omni is just our docs. We're building these out over time as the protocol evolves and matures, but check them out and feel free to ask any questions. Upcoming
Absolutely
releases, we have Mainnet core coming in the next few weeks here. And then in 2025, we'll have our first SolverNet integrations with Symbiotic and beyond. So very excited for those.
Very exciting. Well, everyone go get involved with Tyler, of course, online. Did you shout out your social media profile real quick? Tell them what your Twitter is.
Yeah, definitely. So Twitter is just TTARSI_. TTARSI _.
Awesome. Well, go get involved with Tyler online. If you want to build that project that you just mentioned, reach out to him. And then definitely go explore Omni. They've got some really exciting things on the way. I'm excited to try it out myself. So let's continue building the future of Web3.